Today on Let Them Talk TV, I'll be answering your grammar and English language questions. I asked for questions on my newsletter and I got a lot of responses, and these are three of the best questions, and they are about ought to, the difference between ought to and should, how to use the bee's knees and other such expressions, and when to use my or the. It's a question about possessives, and that'll become clearer later. And this video is available for everyone, but if you'd like to ask the questions for the next Q&A and get your questions answered in videos like this, then do join my Patreon. If you join, you'll get access to more than 6 hours of video that are not available on this channel, on subjects such as grammar. There are a lot of grammar videos on tenses and other things. I've got videos about idioms. There's one behind the scenes video and much more coming soon. And you'll help out the channel. The link is in the description. And the first question is from Santosh in South Africa, and he asks, where does the term the bee's knees come from? Supposedly to describe something or someone that's exceedingly good. Yes, that's correct. The bee's knees. That's a great question. In fact, your question is the bee's knees. And the reason I like the question is because it covers one of my favourite periods of the English language, the Jazz Age. I made a video about that, by the way. It was a very inventive time for the English language, and there are lots of very creative and amusing expressions that come out of that period. And one of them is the bee's knees, which, as you said, simply means great, fantastic, and the absolute best. So to give you an example, you think you're the bee's knees because you're the best in the English class. Well, yes, you are. That's about a person. It can be about a thing. Not a very imaginative answer, but I'll use my phone. Oh, my new phone. Wow, it really is the bee's knees. So anything that's great, fantastic, you can say the bee's knees. And an alternative, because that's one of the phrases that we continue to use, but some phrases of that time are less common and some have died out. So you might also hear the cat's pajamas, which means the same thing as the bee's knees. It's bloody great, it's bloody fantastic. So I should say you should sign up to my newsletter, because it really is the cat's pajamas. And you might also hear the cat's whiskers, the cat's meow, and there are some that didn't catch on, such as the monkey's eyebrows, the eel's elbow, and there's one which is not from the Jazz Age, but has become very popular recently, since the 1980s. I think it's more British than American, and that is the dog's bollocks. Maybe you've heard about it. Something is the dog's bollocks. It's the best. I just saw the new, something movie. I can't think of an example. Was it good? Yeah, it really was the dog's bollocks. My new girlfriend is the dog's bollocks. Does that make any sense? Probably not, but you know what I mean. It just means great, terrific, the best. So the next question is from Freddie Mercury. I'm not sure if it's the Freddie Mercury, probably not. But it's about ought to and the difference between should and ought to. And I do notice from my own teaching that students at B1 level, they're pretty comfortable with should, but you don't hear them using ought to very much. But you should. And I'll explain it a little bit here. But first of all, don't panic. You can always use should. They're very similar. They have very similar meaning. There are some nuances of meaning. Otherwise, I wouldn't explain it'd be pointless having two different words, but you can always replace ought to with should. So if you're not sure, then you can use should. So for personal advice, you should get a haircut. You should come to my party. You should watch that new movie, The Big Alligator. It's very good. It's late, we should go. So then you always use should, probably. Okay, could be an exception, but as I said, the meaning changes slightly. But most of the time you use should in those situations. But you use ought to when you think that there is a rule that comes from, I don't know, a government or an organisation or an authority or a company, or there's some kind of moral duty there, then you can use ought to. Okay, so for example, this road is so dangerous, they ought to put in some traffic lights. They being whoever, the local government. Okay, so it's a duty of the authority to do that, so use ought to. There's nowhere to cross the river, they ought to build a bridge. Okay, again, similar sort of thing. I went to a restaurant in Paris, but they didn't have any vegetarian dishes, so I said to them, you ought to have some vegetarian dishes. And so there you are, it's kind of their duty to provide that for their customers, so I'm using ought to and not should. Should is more general obligation, but because it's more general, should, you can always use it. The grammar with ought to is a little bit different because should is a modal verb, as I'm sure you know. So should is followed by the infinitive without to. You should do this. We should go. Okay. There's no to, but or as you say, we call it ought to. So clearly, it's not the same. So ought is what we call a semi-modal verb. Sometimes it's like a modal. Sometimes it's not. There are a few of these. We won't go into all of them today, but it's a semi-modal verb. So one reason why it's not a modal verb, only semi one, is this very reason, because it's ought to. They ought to do that. The government ought to act. But like modal verbs, you can make a question from it. Ought we to go in there? It's a bit, I should say, it's not that common, but it does exist. You might hear it, so I'll give it to you. So ought we do that? So it's possible to make questions with ought, but should we do that would be much more common. I'm just giving you all the rules, and you can choose to ignore them if you want, but you need to recognise them. And the other reason why it's kind of like an auxiliary verb, a modal auxiliary verb, is because it has a contraction, and that is in a negative. You can have oughtn't. So, for example, these don't belong to us. We oughtn't to take them away. However, almost always you'll hear ought not. That's another reason why it's a semi-modal, because you don't use don't, you use ought not, like should not, can not, will not. You say ought not. Oughtn't exists, but we don't normally say it. So you can make sentences with ought not, that's fine. So for example, we ought not to park here. And one final thing, with ought to, you get oughta. Like you have wanna, gonna, gotta. There's also oughta, which is an unwritten contraction. So they ought to be a law stopping that. They ought to build a bridge here. I'll give you one of two of the examples I gave before. They ought to provide something for the vegetarians. Right, so oughta, you'll often hear that when people are speaking fluently, but don't write it, it's an unwritten contraction. But it's quite common, so yeah, do learn it. And the next question is from Isabel in Sao Paulo, and it's a very interesting question. Thank you. See if I can give you the question while the police car passes. I'm going to take my car to the garage, or I'm going to take the car to the garage. Which is correct? Yeah, think about it. What do you think? Which one is correct? And yeah, this is very tricky, actually. I'll return to the car in the garage in a second, but I'm just first of all going to explain another thing related to it, and that is for body parts. So for body parts in English, you usually use the possessive. Ah, I hurt my arm. My head hurts. I'm going to brush my teeth, which I always thought was kind of stupid because, you know, who else's teeth are you going to brush? But that's what we say. However, if an external object or something strikes you on the body, we use the if you've already got an object pronoun or a name in the phrase. It'd be easy if I give you an example. It fell out the window and hit me on the head. It hit me on the head. Because I said me, I don't need my, okay? So I just say the head. The boxer punched Jackson on the face, okay? So you don't need to say his face because you already mentioned it's Jackson who's been hit. If you don't have the pronoun or the name, then you do use the possessive. So the ball hit me on the arm, yes, or the ball hit my arm, okay? You see, so you don't need sort of to say me or my twice. And this kind of answers Isabel's question. If in a sentence it's clear, the whole thing is talking about you, then you don't need the possessive. And if there's any possibility of ambiguity, then leave in the possessive. So, for example, I staggered home and then opened the front door clumsily, or I opened my front door clumsily. There you have my key. What do you think? Well, because I've already established that it's my home, I don't need to say my, so I opened the front door clumsily. By the way, this is not really a grammar thing. In these cases, maybe the body parts, yes, but in these cases, it's more style, okay? And you'll find native speakers doing this, I'm going to say wrongly, but stylistically, it's better if you don't use the possessive when it's clear who you're talking about. Let's look at another example. I went into the kitchen and made myself a coffee. I went into my kitchen and made myself a coffee. Again, if it's already established, it's your home, it's your kitchen, you don't need to say my kitchen. It's superfluous information. Okay, and there you are. So now returning to Isabel's question, I'm going to take the car to the garage, or I'm going to take my car to the garage. Which is correct? Well, if you live in a household with just one car and you're the only one with a car, then you probably don't need to say my car. I'm going to take the car to the garage, if we already know that. But if there are other cars around, it could be somebody else's, then yeah, I'm going to take my car to the garage. So that's it. So thank you for all the questions. And once again, what did I say? Join our newsletter for if you're interested in the history of the English language and much, much more, and our Patreon site if you want your questions answered, just like this. So the link's somewhere down below in the description. See you soon.